Long ago, before men wrote their stories in books and kings built their cities of stone, there was only the wind, the fire, and the whisper of dreams. The world was young then, breathing softly beneath the endless sky, and out of its slumber came a creature unlike any other, the dragon. It is said that the first dragon was born not from flesh, but from the heartbeat of the earth itself. When mountains cracked and rivers found their courses, a great spark burst forth, scales shimmering like the dawn, eyes glowing with wisdom older than time. From that spark came Eldrin, the first flame, the father of all dragons. The people of the early world feared him, yet they worshipped him too, for where he soared, rain followed the fire, and life rose from ashes. Eldrin's breath was destruction and renewal both, a paradox the ancient tribes could never fully grasp. They carved his image into the faces of cliffs, they burned incense at night, and they whispered his name when thunder rolled across the heavens. Some say that dragons were spirits of balance, guardians of the line between chaos and order. Others believed they were the punishment of gods, born to remind humanity of its arrogance. But in truth, the dragons were something deeper, creatures of thought and flame, dream and will. They existed because the world needed them too. Centuries passed, and Eldrin's children filled the skies. Some were gentle, their scales glinting silver in moonlight. Others were wrathful, black as storms and hungry for the scent of war. But all shared the same eternal bond, the call of the fire within, the voice that connected them to the heartbeat of creation. Among the human tribes, legends began to bloom like wildflowers after rain. Children grew up listening to stories of dragon encounters, tales that stirred both wonder and terror. One such story spoke of Kale, a shepherd boy who climbed the burning mountain to ask Eldrin a question no man dared speak. Why must you destroy to bring life? The mountain trembled under Kale's feet. Smoke wrapped around him, and a voice like thunder answered, "Because creation sleeps within the ashes, child of dust, you cannot grow until something ends." That answer became the first truth of dragonkind. That endings are not always death, but beginnings in disguise. Over time, men learned to speak with dragons. The old songs say that when the moon was full, the bravest among them would offer a pearl or a flame as tribute. And if the dragon accepted, he would share his wisdom, teaching them how to harness fire without being consumed by it. Thus began the era of harmony, when dragons and humans lived side by side, bound by respect. But harmony never lasts forever. One night, beneath an eclipse that turned the sky to blood, a dragon was slain. His name was Sirath, and his death marked the first wound between man and dragon. The reason was fear, the same fear that would shape all ages to come. The king of Aradel, driven by greed, had ordered Serath's death to steal the secret of his flame. And though the dragon's body perished, his spirit cursed the earth. Let fire never again bring peace. From that night, every flame burned with both light and shadow. The bond shattered, men hunted dragons, and dragons withdrew beyond the mountains into the mists of myth. The songs that once sang of friendship turned into tales of warning. Mothers whispered them to children before sleep, not to inspire but to frighten. Still, deep in the forgotten valleys, the few remaining dragons dreamed. They dreamed of the world that had once loved them, of the songs that had given them names. And in those dreams, a promise formed, that one day the age of fire and man would return, when both would remember the first truth again. From ashes, life is born. Centuries later, only ruins and half-remembered myths remained. Scholars argued over carvings, priests twisted the legends into sermons. But somewhere in a cave that hummed like a heartbeat, an egg slept beneath the stone, warm, alive, and waiting. And when the first crack split the silence, the wind itself seemed to pause. The dragons were not gone. They were waiting for the world to be ready again. When the last echo of dragon wings faded into legend, humankind turned its eyes away from the sky. The old fires that once lit the hearts of men dimmed into superstition, ashes of belief scattered by time. But truth, like embers, never dies completely. Beneath the forgotten mountains, a small order of monks preserved the memory of the dragons. They called themselves the Flame Keepers. They believed that every spark carried a whisper of Eldrin's soul, the first dragon's breath still lingering in the heart of the world. In their hidden monastery of Vailor, the Flame Keepers trained not to wield fire, but to understand it. For fire, they said, was not merely heat or destruction, it was emotion itself, rage, passion, courage and faith, burning in equal measure. At the heart of Vailor stood the pyre of memory, a flame said to have burned since the age of Eldrin. It was small, barely the size of a candle, yet no wind, no storm, no passing of centuries could extinguish it. The monks guarded it with devotion, believing that when that flame died, the world's last hope would fade with it. Among them was a young novice named Lyra. She was unlike the others, quiet but curious, with eyes that mirrored the golden hue of burning embers. Orphaned during a famine, she had been found as a baby on the monastery's steps, wrapped in cloth marked with a single symbol, a dragon's spiral. Lyra grew up with stories of dragons whispered like bedtime prayers. While others treated the tales as sacred mysteries, she treated them as questions that begged for answers. "If dragons are gone," she once asked her teacher, "why do I dream of wings?" The elder smiled sadly. "Because perhaps the fire still remembers you." Years passed, and Lyra's dreams grew stronger. She would wake with the sound of wings in her ears and the taste of smoke on her tongue. Sometimes, in the stillness of dawn, the pyre of memory flickered brighter when she passed by, as if the flame itself recognized her. Then came the night the mountain trembled. The stars vanished behind clouds of ash, and the wind howled like a wounded beast. The monks rushed to the pyre, fearing it would be lost, but the flame did not falter. Instead, it grew, bright and wild, painting the walls with the shadows of wings. The abbot fell to his knees. "It is the sign of awakening," he whispered. "The dragons are stirring once more." The next morning, the tremors stopped, but a crack had appeared on the monastery floor. From within that fracture, a faint rhythmic pulse could be heard, like a heartbeat. Lyra, drawn by something she couldn't name, knelt beside it. "It's alive," she breathed. The abbot forbade anyone from touching it. "Some fires are not meant for man to hold," he warned, but Lyra could not stay away. Every night, she returned to the crack, placing her hand upon the warm stone, whispering to it stories of Eldrin and the lost age of dragons. Each time, the pulse grew stronger. Weeks passed before the abbot discovered her secret. "You meddle with powers beyond your understanding," he scolded, but Lyra's eyes burned with quiet defiance. "Maybe it is not power," she said softly. "Maybe it's a promise." That night, thunder shattered the silence once again. The ground split wide open beneath the pyre of memory, revealing a massive chamber glowing with light. Lyra and the monks descended, and there, resting upon a pedestal of obsidian, lay an egg. Vast as a man's chest, shimmering like molten gold. The abbot wept. "It cannot be," he whispered. "A dragon's egg, after all this time." But Lyra stepped closer, and as she did, the egg stirred. Cracks spread across its surface, and with a burst of light it hatched. Out came a small creature, trembling, covered in glistening scales. It blinked up at her with eyes like living fire. The monks fell to their knees, but Lyra reached out her hand. The hatchling did not flinch. Instead, it placed its snout against her palm. In that instant, a surge of warmth filled the chamber, not heat, but connection. The pyre of memory flared brighter than ever, and every candle in Vailor lit itself without flame. The abbot bowed his head. "The prophecy is fulfilled," he said. "The flame has chosen its keeper." But not all were ready to embrace the return of dragons. Far beyond Vailor, in the empire of Aradel, whispers reached the ears of King Mairin, a ruler who feared nothing more than losing control. "If the beasts of old rise again," he told his council, "so will the chaos they bring. The age of man will burn." He ordered his spies to find this miracle child and bring her to him, alive if possible. He would learn the dragon's secret and bind it to his will, just as his ancestor once slew Serath for the same desire. Lyra, unaware of the danger, grew close to the hatchling. She named him Piran, after the eternal flame. Together they learned, she of his voice, and he of her heart. They spoke not in words, but through feeling, a bond of trust that transcended language. But peace is a fragile thing. One night, while Lyra slept, fire filled the sky above Vailor. Soldiers had come, the monastery burned, and the monks were scattered. Piran roared for the first time, his breath scorching steel and shadow alike. Yet there were too many. The abbot, mortally wounded, pressed a glowing crystal into Lyra's hands. "Take him," he gasped. "Find the place where the first fire fell. Only there can the flame be reborn." Lyra fled into the mountains, clutching Piran close. Behind her, the only home she'd ever known turned to ash. When dawn broke, smoke still rose from the valley, and with it, the end of an age. Yet from that ruin, a new journey began, one that would decide the fate of both mankind and dragonkind. As Lyra looked back one last time, Piran lifted his small head toward the horizon. His eyes blazed with a light older than the sun. The world had forgotten dragons, but dragons had not forgotten the world. Snow fell in silence as Lyra trudged through the mountain pass, the baby dragon Piran nestled against her chest beneath a tattered cloak. The cold bit deep, yet wherever Piran's small wings brushed her, warmth bloomed. His fire was still weak, more ember than blaze, but it was enough to keep them alive. Behind them, Vailor burned. Ahead lay only uncertainty. For 3 days they wandered, surviving on melted snow and scraps of dried fruit, stolen from the monastery's ruins. Lyra's every step was haunted by the abbot's final words. "Find the place where the first fire fell." But what did it mean? A mountain, a ruin, a legend. No map bore such a name. By the 4th night, Lyra's strength faltered. She collapsed beside a frozen stream, whispering, "I can't. Go on." Piran chirped weakly, pressing his head against her cheek, his breath warm as sunrise. In that fragile touch, she felt something shift, not just comfort, but resolve. The fire of survival rekindled within her heart. When dawn broke, they found shelter in a cavern veiled by ice. There, Lyra built a small fire, but before she could strike flint, Piran stepped forward. His throat shimmered, and a tiny spark escaped his mouth, igniting the twigs. Lyra stared in awe. "You've done it," she whispered. "Your first flame." Piran blinked proudly, then sneezed, sending a puff of smoke into her face. For the first time in weeks, she laughed. That sound, bright and human, echoed through the cave like sunlight breaking the storm. Days turned into weeks. In the frozen silence, girl and dragon learned from each other. Lyra hunted and gathered while Piran practiced flying, often clumsy, sometimes graceful. When he failed, she teased him gently. "Even the sky takes time to learn you." When she despaired, Piran would curl around her, heartbeat steady as thunder in the distance. But peace, as always, was short-lived. One night, distant horns echoed through the mountains, sharp and haunting. Lyra's blood ran cold. Soldiers. The king's hunters had found their trail. She gathered her things in haste. Piran flapped beside her, uneasy. "We must go," she whispered. "If they find us, they'll take you." They fled into the storm, snow and wind whipping their faces raw. Behind them, torches glimmered like a line of fire. Arrows hissed through the darkness. One struck a nearby rock, splintering with a metallic ring. Piran roared, a fierce rising sound that scattered crows from the cliffs. For the first time, Lyra saw a flash of what he would become. She leapt onto a frozen ledge, clutching his neck. "Fly, Piran!" He hesitated, trembling, his wings still small. "Please," she begged, "for both of us." He spread his wings, uncertain but willing. With a cry that split the night, Piran leapt into the wind. The world fell away beneath them. Snowfields blurred into silver waves as they soared. Clumsy at first, then steady, carried by instinct older than memory. The hunters below could only stare as the dragon vanished into the clouds with a girl clinging to his back. For hours they flew, until exhaustion pulled them down near the shores of a frozen lake. Lyra slid from his back, her body trembling, her heart soaring. "You did it," she whispered. "You really did." Piran, proud but weary, nuzzled her hand. His scales shimmered faintly, no longer the dull gold of hatchling days, but a deeper bronze, like sunlight filtered through dust. He was growing, and with him, so too grew the world's forgotten fire. That night, Lyra dreamed again. She stood in a field of molten light, the air alive with whispers. Before her rose a figure, vast, radiant, draconic, Eldrin, the first flame. Its eyes, ancient and sorrowful, burned like dying stars. "You are the bridge," it said, voice echoing through her bones. "The flame must burn not to destroy, but to unite. Beware the hands of kings, for they seek to chain the fire that was meant to free." Lyra reached out, but the vision dissolved, replaced by the cold dawn. When she awoke, Piran was staring at the horizon. Smoke rose in the distance, not from fire, but from chimneys. Civilization. After weeks of wilderness, they had found a village. Lyra pulled her cloak tighter. "We need supplies," she murmured, "and answers." They entered at dusk. The villagers stared, but Piran hid beneath a heavy tarp, disguised as a cartload of hay. Still, whispers spread. A girl with strange eyes, a beast-shaped shadow. In the corner of the tavern, a hooded man watched them closely. Lyra bought bread, water and cloth. When she turned to leave, the man rose and followed her. "You shouldn't travel alone," he said softly. "The king's hunters are everywhere." Lyra stiffened. "Who are you?" He smiled faintly. "A friend of those who still believe in dragons." His name was Kale, a wanderer with a scar across his jaw and eyes that hinted at secrets. He claimed to have once served the Flamekeepers, long before Vylor fell. "The place you seek," he told her that night as they sat by a dying fire, "lies beyond the ashen peaks. They call it the Cradle of Embers. Legend says the first fire fell there, when the dragons and men still walked as equals." Lyra's pulse quickened. "That's where we're going." Kyle nodded. "Then you'll need guidance and protection. The king's reach grows longer every day." Unbeknownst to them, a shadow moved among the trees, a black-armored rider bearing the sigil of Aradel. He watched their camp from afar, his eyes cold and calculating. "So," he murmured, "the child lives." The next morning, they journeyed together, girl, dragon, and the stranger bound by fate. As they crossed valleys and rivers, Piran grew rapidly, his wings strong, his breath capable of melting frost. Lyra began to understand the rhythm of their bond. When she felt fear, Piran's fire dimmed. When she hoped, it burned bright. Kale noticed. "He draws from you," he said. "You are his heart, and he is your flame." But danger followed them like a shadow. In the ruins of an old watchtower, the king's men ambushed them. Swords clashed. Piran roared, unleashing a torrent of fire that lit the night sky. Lyra fought beside Kyle, wielding nothing but a broken staff and her courage. When the smoke cleared, the soldiers were gone, either fled or ash. But Kyle was wounded. As she bound his arm, he whispered, "You have the strength of Valor within you. Don't let them take that." That night, under a sky alive with stars, Lyra looked at Piran, now nearly the size of a horse. "The world fears you," she said softly, "but maybe it's time they remember why they should hope instead." Piran blinked slowly, then spread his wings wide, not in threat, but in promise. And high above them, far beyond mortal sight, a spark moved across the heavens, a sign that somewhere, in the realm of dragons, the ancient fire stirred once more. The girl and the dragon were no longer running, they were awakening. A few days later, when the prince's wounds had finally healed, he decided to leave the palace and begin a new journey. He was no longer just a royal prince. He had now seen the harsh truths of life. He reached a small village where people were suffering from poverty and oppression. There, an old woman offered him food and said, "My son, a true prince is not the one who wears a crown, but the one who feels the pain of others." Those words deeply touched the prince's heart. He thought, "Perhaps destiny has taken me away from the palace for a reason. Maybe my purpose is to live for others, to fight for justice." From that day, he began traveling from village to village, helping the poor and standing up against tyranny with his sword. Gradually, his bravery became legendary, and people started calling him the Wandering Prince. One day, as he was passing through a forest, a wise hermit stopped him and said, "O Prince, your story is not yet over. The girl who once saved your life, she is still waiting for you." The prince stopped in his tracks. His heart trembled with hope. Perhaps destiny will bring us together once again. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, the wandering prince followed the hermit's words and returned to the valley where his story had begun. The wind carried with it a familiar fragrance, the same gentle scent of the meadow where he had once met the brave village girl who saved his life. He reached a small cottage by the river. There she was, older, wiser, but her eyes still held the same courage and kindness. When she saw him, tears welled up in her eyes. "I knew you'd return one day," she whispered softly. The prince knelt before her, saying, "You gave me life when I had lost everything. I am no longer a prince of a palace. I am a servant of the people. But if you allow me, I wish to serve beside you for the rest of my days." The girl smiled, and together they began a new chapter, not in luxury, but in purpose. They built a small school for orphans, taught villagers to defend themselves, and inspired a generation to rise against injustice. Years passed, and the tale of the wandering prince and the village heroine became a legend told across kingdoms, not as a story of royalty, but as a story of humanity, love, and courage. And in that valley, where the wind still carried their laughter, people would often say, "True royalty lies not in blood, but in the heart that beats for others."